All right, today is July 17th, 2017, and I'm here with Father Jerry Albright. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So my first question for you is, what led you to religious life?
Well, it's an odd story in one sense. Although I'm from Dearborn, Michigan, just west of here, grew up there, my parents were originally from Upper Michigan, way up Upper Michigan. In fact, the far end of Upper Michigan, Gogebic County, a little beyond that, you're in Wisconsin. Keweenaw Peninsula. My folks were up there because their families came from Europe. My mother, family from Yugoslavia, some so half Slovenian, and my father's from Germany, and so it's the other half, basically. And they came over here and settled there because Calumet, Michigan is the copper country. And that was the time when copper was being mined up there. No longer is. The mines are all full of Lake Superior water. But the forest trees are still there, but my father's family settled there because logging was of major importance back then in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Logging for making of railroad ties. In fact, that was where most of the railroad ties from Michigan and this part of the United States came from originally up there. But my father wanted to be a dentist, of all things. But he came down here to be a dentist, not at our own dental school, which, alas, wasn't in existence at that time. He always would say to me that had I known that the University of Detroit's dental school would be there, I wouldn't have gone because I couldn't have afforded it. So I went to that other dental school out in Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan. And so that's how he and my mother then came down, and lo and behold, ended up in Dearborn, and that's where I came from. Knew nothing about those what? Jesuits? No, they didn't know anything about the Jesuits. But they heard from one of my aunts that there was a little school out northwest edge of Detroit back in the 30s that was a very nice school. University of Detroit High School. And so, leaving Dearborn, they took the road called the Outer Drive, which was at the outer edge of Detroit, hence Outer Drive. And we used to come up and to this school up the road here on 7 Mile and Livernois, or near it, anyway, Cambridge, over there. And that's where I joined the school in my second year of high school. That's when I met my first Jesuits. But I kind of liked what I saw, not because of the school, but I kind of got attracted to those long cassocked and cinctured religious called the Jesuits who were teaching. I never did get down to the university here. That was too far away at 6 Mile. But I do remember we would look out the second floor of the high school there, over the treetops, and see not the University of Detroit, but straight south, Marygrove College. Well, we high school kids weren't thinking of Marygrove College. No, we were thinking rather of that little high school at the east end of Marygrove College, Immaculata High School, where the girls were. But I didn't go that direction. I ended up showing an interest in the Jesuits. They showed an interest in me. And so even before I graduated from the high school, I went down to the novitiate before graduation even took place. It was in February of my senior year that I did that. And say, why didn't I stick around and graduate first? After all, the usual time for joining the Jesuits then was in mid-August. But that was also World War II time. And therefore, there was that thing called the draft. And so, lo and behold, I joined the Jesuits and became a draft dodger. And I guess I still am, in one sense. But the reason was the war was winding down, and it was just a question of getting it settled with less hassle if I joined earlier. Yes, I did graduate from high school. They sent me about 3 years later my diploma, which I probably still have buried around somewhere, but I didn't graduate from there. But I joined the Jesuits and went down to our novitiate, our entering place, which at that time was down just outside of Cincinnati, Ohio, in a little town called Milford. It's still there, as a matter of fact, not the novitiate, but it's a retreat house, still going and going strong. I spent about 4.5 years there doing some basic college work, mainly in the liberal arts. It's not science, but liberal arts. And after that, I and the rest of my class in August of 49 went to the next step along the way, our years of philosophy. Our philosophy at that time was at southern Indiana, a place called West Baden. Oh, it's about 60 miles or so north of Louisville, Kentucky. And I was there for about 6 months when the prefect of studies for the area came in, called me into his office and said, we're going to need some Jesuits teaching up at our university in Detroit, here, and also at John Carroll University in Cleveland, teaching biology. And we figured you are going to be one of the two. And biology? I thought I was getting ready for maybe teaching English or something on this. And I remember Father Mayline said, is that okay? But of course, in those days, if they were asked that by a superior, the answer had to be, well, yes, of course. But that's what happened. And so I got sent then down for 2 years to Mobile, Alabama, on the coast, because that was a place where we could combine philosophy studies with science. And that's where I got my basic science. 2 years down there, getting my undergraduate science in biology and chemistry and physics and more math and things like that. I was down there for 2 years, enjoyed the Gulf region for 2 years, but a lot of time just studying along with fellow Jesuits from all over the country, because that was a place in which those destined for science would be getting their early training. I used to come up here in the summertime. I came to John Carroll in Cleveland and took some courses there on this. And then said, well, it's about time for the next step, they said. Well, when I was told I was to be either at John Carroll or University of Detroit, it wasn't University of Detroit Mercy then, just University of Detroit, of course, I ended up here. Only because the other person, who was a year ahead of me, Father Phil Vogel, was called to what was needed, a place needed biologists earlier, which was John Carroll. And so I ended up back here in my hometown and taught here in the summer right after philosophy in 56, 57, taught biology here, right at the university here. At that time, the courses were being taught in biology at what is now our architect building. It was the original science building here on campus. In fact, until they obliterated it over the front door of the building, it used to say right in the stone science. You could see it if you were along Livernois and looked at that building. And on the second floor was where we had biology. And I taught a biology course there in the summer of 56, the summer of 57. Okay. But then I had to go back and finish theology studies for 4 years. And I did just that on this. Finished it off, was ordained to the priesthood in 1958. Okay. Finished off finally, and at long last put my biology and science to official full-time work after my arrival here at the University of Detroit in August of 1960. And I've been here ever since. And so a lot of things have happened along the way, but that's how I got started. I taught not only here, but I also taught a bit at our dental school back then to our dental hygienists, and I also taught a bit at Mercy. That was even before we merged. That gives you an idea what the background was.
Great, thank you. So you already kind of answered the question of what led you to the Jesuits, but is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I was interested. I didn't join the Jesuits to be a science teacher. In fact, I wasn't even thinking of science then. I thought the religious life was something that was appropriate for me on this. And so I figured that was appropriate in the sense of that's where God wanted me. A lot of it certainly had to do with the fact both my mother and the father were very much strongly Catholic religious. Me and my brother and I were both brought up, very definitely Catholics. We went to Catholic grade school and then high school. My brother followed me. He's deceased now, but followed me later on. And so we had a good, strong spiritual background and Catholicism right from the beginning. And so it was sort of a natural thing for me then to be thinking along that line. And so at the age of 17, I decided that, maybe that's what I was called to be. Was it the priesthood itself that first attracted me to the Jesuits? No, as a matter of fact, it wasn't. It was what the Jesuits, as Jesuits, were doing at the high school a mile north of here. Teaching, but not just teaching. It was their example and how they functioned. And I got to know them, a number of them, they're all deceased now, but I got to know a number of them very well. And we got talking about the religious life and what it entailed, and working with people not only in teaching in science or in whatever it might be, but also working with young people in particular in developing spirituality to blend in with the rest of life as they grew up. Have I ever regretted it? Not in the slightest.
Great, thank you. So again, you've kind of also answered this question, but is there anything you'd like to add about your formation or your academic background?
My academic background?
Yes.
Sure, I'll add a bit more.
Okay.
After I got those basic courses at the equivalent of the regular college level, like in other words for the bachelor's degree, down at Mobile, Spring Hill College, by the way, was the name of this place down there. Another one of our 28 Jesuit schools here in the United States. I was sent for my doctoral work on this. And so where did I go? Well, I had two choices, okay, at that time, either St. Louis University or Loyola University in Chicago. I had come from Spring Hill College in Mobile up to Chicago and Detroit here in the summer times, but I stayed along the way in St. Louis both times. Direct flights in those days were not nearly as common and taken for granted as they are now, so we went into St. Louis, and this was in the summertime, and I didn't think much of the heat of St. Louis. I thought Chicago was much cooler, and it was on this, and still is. Okay, so I picked Loyola like that. When I would say, which of the two do you? Well, they said, which of the two do you want? So I went to Loyola University in Chicago for those 4 years there in the early 50s for my master's and doctoral work. I was interested in, of course, they wanted me for biology, and at that time, biology in general, not just for us, but in general, had a strong emphasis on what we would call organismal biology. It was during those years in 1953 that a couple of fellows that I never did meet came up with something called DNA. which of course rocked the scientific boat tremendously. And things switched more in terms of emphasis across the country to cellular, molecular, genetic biology rather than organismal biology. But I was already in organismal biology. Environmental emphasis came in only much later, so I was at the core of it in organismal biology. And so I thought, well, coming here, which I knew I would be doing at that time eventually, I thought, well, let's get into something, one aspect of that. And I picked anatomy on this. And so I went to the medical school, Stritch School of Medicine, part of Loyola University in Chicago. And I was there for 4 years, learning human anatomy, but other aspects of animal anatomy too, because I knew that's the kind of thing I'd be involved in here. And so I got my doctorate, master's and doctorate there, and for 4 years of this, and graduated formally in 55 on this from that. But that's why I'm from Loyola University, Chicago. Stritch School of Medicine. Everything was there, which was right at that time in downtown Chicago, literally. Not out where it is now in suburbia Chicago, Maywood, but downtown. And so that's where I got my start formally then, and that's what got me ready to eventually come here as I did in August then, as I said, of 1960. And I've been teaching here mostly anatomy, but by no means only that. I've taught, as a matter of fact, 19 over the years, not all at the same time, 19 different areas of biology courses on this along the way. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So again, you've already kind of answered the question, what led you to your role at the University of Detroit Mercy?
That's what brought me here.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to add about maybe like your role here?
My role here? Well, although I was in high school north of here, I never did get down to the University of Detroit here at that time on this. My role here came when I got here for the first time to teach in the summer back in mid-50s on this. And I came just as an adjunct then for those 2 summers. When I got here in 1960, I started teaching like a regular faculty person. I remember in those days, my salary, along with the other new arrivals, was in the 9,500 area for the year's work. Things have changed a bit, of course, since then. But that was standard at that time. I was a regular faculty member here, but just beginning. I had to get familiar with the university. It was very different at that time in terms of just the basic structure, for instance. The Callahan Hall was the memorial building back then, okay? The residence halls of now were on the other side of a very, very busy street. We had to watch for the traffic, the buses roaring by. There was a little hospital called Brent Hospital, which is gone now, but would be right in where the parking lot is over across near the engineering building there. The Scheipel Hall was there at the time, and the other residence halls were there too, except for the quadrangle. That came only later on this. The student union wasn't nearly as big and nice as it is now. In fact, the student union developed only later on. The administration building wasn't even up at that time when I got here. That came only in the later 1960s. The entrance down there to the off Livernois for the university now and the mall along the way, that was one of the main streets cutting right through campus at the time I first got here on this. I recall also that between where the architect building is now and the administration building is now. It was kind of swampy in there. I mean, you could hear, you see the water and the reeds in the for the first few years there on this. So things have indeed changed. The Briggs building, yes, it's just gone up. Up in the business school and all the other buildings that still show the basic Spanish architecture characteristic of the older buildings here, of course, stood out. This. When I first got here, I lived at Lansing Riley here for a couple of years, but I moved then on down with some other Jesuits who were already there to be in the residence halls where I spent. I lived down there. I had a room down there. I ate up here basically, but at Lansing Riley. But I lived down there, so to be near students, because I worked with students, did a lot of spiritual counseling then on this, a bit of biological answering to questions for the residence hall students who knew I was nearby, but it was basically spiritual counseling and counseling in general to the residence students. I was there from 1962 for 22 years till 1984. Lived down there on this. During that time, a lot of other changes were taking place along the way. In the late 1960s, the Life Sciences building went up finally, as did at about the same time the administration building, Fisher building right now on this. The Life Sciences building, I was involved a bit in the planning for the details, biologically speaking, in the inside, but that's the extent of it. But there are still some things there that have my imprint on them because I was at that time, late 60s, chairman of the biology department on this. And so I was contacted to have some input on this, and I did. The biology department was far different then than it is now, as you might expect after all these many years on this. I was chair, asked to be chair by the president of the university. At that time, it was the president who did things like that, not the academic vice president, but the president. And I'd only been here 2 years, and he wanted me to take over as chair. And I was not happy with it, frankly, because as I told him, I said, well, I'm not even tenured yet. I've got to get tenured if I ever expect to get promoted and end up in place. And he said, oh, don't worry about that. He said, it's okay. We'll see that you get taken care of. That kind of thing would never happen these days to anybody on this. But I remember I asked the president, I said, well, if you want me to do it, I will be chair. But I like to have that. I've got to have that in writing because your successor down the road may not want to take my word for it. And he said, oh, okay. So he scowled and gave me a note. I still have it. So I was chairman of the department then. I'd only been here a couple of years, and I was chairman then for 6 or 7 years on this, and then I passed it on to somebody else. But in the meantime, I was teaching all the way along on this, and I have been ever since. I've had one sabbatical along the way, and that was in the early 70s when I went out to the West Coast for a break, a sabbatical. I taught a course at our other university, well, one of our other universities, the University of San Francisco. Taught one biology course to help pay the money that I wasn't making by not being here. But I got to know the West Coast a bit, not only San Francisco, but San Diego and the other Los Angeles and other areas of the West Coast. I also, during the summers, though, went to a couple of other places for upgrading my background those early days. Went down to the Kentucky University in Louisville, and also for a course. Also went to Dayton, Ohio for a course, and I went to the University of Washington out on the West Coast also in the summertime for summer courses, updating along the way. And I remember very clearly we used to wait at the University of Washington for classes to start at 8 in the morning and admire Mount Rainier to the southeast, 60, 80 miles away. I can see it in my mind's eye yet today. This. I was chairman of the biology department for about 6, 8 years there, but that it was time for a change, so I got back to regular teaching on this. I was also involved right away in working with especially pre-medical and pre-dental students, and I've been doing that ever since. The strongest emphasis on pre-meds and pre-dents, of which we have quite a number here, especially pre-dental students, understandably so, since we have one of the 2 dental schools in the state of Michigan. I was involved not only with the students and courses that the pre-dentist and pre-medical students would be taking, others would be taking it too, but also because we had to write letters in those days to help our students get into professional schools of medicine or dentistry. And so I established here then in my second year here a committee on student evaluations for the medical and dental schools. And I've been involved in that ever since on this. We have a regular committee and still going. I'm in my last year right now as I'm retiring. But no one wanted to be chairman writing all those letters of the committee. And so I ended up being chairman all the way along for these 55 years along the way. We've, during that time, we've interviewed, I estimate, almost 3,000 different pre-medical and pre-dental students. That's just pre-meds and pre-dents, and a few pre-veterinary med students along the way, both osteopathic and allopathic human medical school too, and that's it. Things connected with that, such as nursing, for instance, came in only after the merger of the 2 universities and the colleges, the University of Detroit and Mercy. That came later on, as did the physician assistants and some other programs too, focused and very well focused and strongly focused on the health profession. But I've been involved almost exclusively with pre-meds and pre-dents along the way. Not only writing letters, interviewing them and writing the letters from the committee notes and all, and working to help them get in, but also doing a lot of individual counseling work, both science and also personal counseling along the way, helping our students with the ups and downs of growing up through college and the years following. I've been in contact with many of the students along the way. I've had well over 100 marriages that I've officiated at from former students. I'm in contact still with a number of students, and some have come by and visited. In fact, just this past year, a couple of whose wedding I had back in the late 60s were here. I'm still in contact with Mike and Colleen Steenberg and their families. I didn't have their weddings. Mike was in charge of the residence halls back in the early 60s, but I've been in contact with them and many others all the way along this. So I do keep in contact with lots of students, so not all. And every so often I hear from somebody say, "You won't remember me, but you had me in class back in 1962, and I remember," something or other, and along the way it is. And yes, over the years I've had more than a few students in, maybe September, stop by my office on this, a new freshman, and said, "My mom said to say hello," and I'm waiting for the day when I hear, "Grandma says to say hello." It hasn't happened yet, but it could easily. I know. So that's the kind of thing. I was also chairman a second time later on for another 6-8 years. I was also here at the time in 1979 when the university was in, to put it mildly, major financial crisis time. At that time, there were some sudden and rather quick changes taking place. The president, a Jesuit, the Karen, retired on this. This was 79. One of the Jesuits, Father Norman McKendrick, an English teacher, was up at in Boston getting trained to be the academic vice president. He had been picked. The dean of the College of Liberal Arts had just taken a position elsewhere. By that time, science had moved out of arts and sciences, where we originally were when I got here, had been merged with engineering. Now it's engineering and science, but it wasn't back then. It was arts and sciences then. And so things were in turmoil. The faculty union, which was in existence, was threatening major strike. This was in the summer of '79. And I remember writing Father McKendrick, getting trained to be the academic vice president, who was up in Boston, saying, "You better get settled pretty quick because we're falling apart here." And no president on this. No one wanted to be president, apparently, understandably so in crisis time. And the next thing I heard was that Father Mitchell from New York province, never even been here before, took on the job as president here. I never even heard of him, frankly, at this. But he came here as president in 1980. But before he even got here, he asked me, having talked with Father McKendrick, the new AVP to be, if I, a biology faculty member in the College of Engineering and Science, would take over the dean's job in liberal arts. Can you imagine what would happen now if someone was picked from one college and made power as dean over another college here or any place else? But it happened on this. And so I came on as interim dean of the College of Liberal Arts. I said I would do it only if I could teach one course at night in science, because I knew that was just temporary. I wanted to have my position still back where it belonged in biology. He said, "Oh, that's okay." So I was interim dean for 79 to 80, but things hadn't been settled yet fully. And so they said, "Well, will you stay on for another year?" And I remember I said, "Yes, one more year, but not as interim dean. I've got to be real dean, because faculty doesn't pay any attention to interims. They got to have a real boss." And I was having trouble getting my job done. So they said, "Okay, we'll make you officially dean." A year later, as dean, said, "Well, we're not settled yet, but we're getting there." And they were getting there. I said, "Will you take it up for another year?" And I said, "Well, yeah, one more." But I said, "For goodness sake, if you find somebody along the way, don't hesitate as to how you're going to break the news to me. Just let me know and I'll head back to life sciences right away." A year later, they did find someone else. So I went back after 3 years to full-time biology over in the life sciences building, and been there for right along. So this has been going on then quite a while. Things changed a lot here. The number of Jesuits had increased here at the university, because not only was there university Jesuits teaching here, but other Jesuits who were living in the area ended up living here, and that's why we put on the new wing south of this building here, Lansing Riley, which is connected with it now. And it was then, later on, when things switched, was turned over about 10 years later to the nursing school. And that's why the nursing school is connected architecturally with Lansing Riley Hall, here, the Jesuit residence. That went up then, and then just this past year, they put up the addition to that at the south end, near the business school and the north side of the Briggs building. That's for the developing, especially the developing physician assistant program. So that was another change that took place. So things have been happening along the way that I've seen along the way. The big parking lot to the east of Lansing Riley Hall and the nursing school here, it was once a football field. I remember back then when at commencement time, we'd have commencement in May outside, and they put chairs out there for the faculty, and we'd sit in those chairs for 2 hours in the hot sun it seemed hot, and it was pretty hot oftentimes, but it wasn't the sun that was the problem so much as the mosquitoes in the grass. And we couldn't do anything but kind of swat them and wish we weren't there, but that was life back then.
Great. So my next question, again, you kind of touched on it, but how has your ministry changed over the years?
How is my what?
Ministry.
My ministry?
Yes.
Okay. My ministry has changed personally, and I presume that's what you're referring to specifically. Okay, I used to do a good bit of ministry work. I would help out in the parishes a lot, traveled around from west of here, or even St. Paul's on the Lake a number of times. Other parishes would help out there. But it was mainly focused here on campus, handling masses, and confessional work too. But my ministry was mainly here individual counseling, privately with students going through the ups and downs, crises of life. Spiritually, sometimes strongly spiritually, but oftentimes, more often, connected in from the spiritual with the basic, I would say the basic developmental challenges that growing up through college and entering the post-college years brought about. So I did a lot of individual, kind of still have up until recently, over the years. So it's mostly for me been that. Although I have had, up until recently, I've had a good bit of masses and homilies and other things too over in the student chapel on this, and also in the residence hall too on this. So it's been mostly that with counseling work on this. But that's been the focus of it. Individual counseling, and basically of as you'd expect, of a very private, individualized nature. Yeah.
Great. So my next question is kind of shifting directions a little bit, but can you tell us about an experience that informed your ideas about social justice?
Social justice?
Yes.
Oh, the changes that have taken place across the country and across the world in my 57 years here on this are overwhelmingly complex and changed so extensively. The one of the most, for me anyway, most obvious ones that have taken place have been the interrelationships of Catholicism and the Catholic Church itself, and the changes that have been going on there continuously, theologically and other ways, but also with reference to the Roman Catholic Church and its relationship to the world and the changes that are going on in the world. The traditionalist aspects of the Roman Catholicism that have taken place over the years I've been here are tremendous on this. Ending up with a fellow Jesuit of all things as Pope right now, just never expected along the way. And the relationship of the Vatican and the official Roman Catholic Church to the world in general, including the United States here, has changed so much from the more anciently focused traditionalism of when I first got here. And that's been reflected in so many other ways too. One of the emphasis has been the interrelationship of Catholicism with other religious organizations. And I've seen it most extensively here, but not uniquely that, most extensively here with the many students that we now have here who have a background connected with their origins of their parents and grandparents, and oftentimes themselves from the Middle East. And so the large number of Muslim students that we have here, and I've gotten to know and become close friends with many, many of them, and the merging there and the relationship that they have along with Catholicism and other branches of Christianity here are just complexly intermixed and constantly changing. Oh, sometimes it's reflected in a big way, like presidential elections and things like that. Oftentimes it's more subtle but very definite innately in existence too. The relationships of different groups and different ways of thinking have become obviously more and more complex. And but I've been working, I'm the only one of course, I've been working a lot to help that mixture here at our university with people I'm in direct contact with work much more smoothly. We have a lot of, as most people are well aware of, we have a lot of Middle Easterners from various countries over there who are right here in Detroit. And as a matter of fact, a very large number of them in my own hometown, Dearborn, right west of here, which I think has one of the largest, if not the largest, concentration of Mid-Eastern people along the way here who have moved here. And moving in and working together and balancing off things, oftentimes with opposition from other corners, is made for a challenge. But it's a challenge I look forward, in a sense, to working with, because that's what we're about, to bring about changes and help smooth things over and bring a closer interrelationship of people with different backgrounds and outlooks to work together more effectively for the benefit of all, not just a few. And so, yeah, that has been a very important aspect here. It's for me, it's not so much. It's not so much working from the pulpit, for instance, but rather with individual people on this. One reason is that in the last 20 years or so, my locomotor abilities have been limited, so I can't go out to parishes like I used to. That's due to a complex neurological problem, gait initiation ataxia. Sounds terrible on this. It's not Alzheimer's or anything like that. It's just that it's a question of balance, and therefore I can't drive and I can't go out. And so I don't end up talking from the pulpit, but I do a lot of work and have been with individual students in small groups right here on campus.
Great.
That's
Yeah.
a bit of focus there, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So my next question for you is, how does the Jesuit charism influence your work?
Well, it influences my work basically because we are an international organization, of course, and the largest in terms of numbers of people in the religious life. The groups, yeah, we're down like the rest of them are. We're about 18,000 around the world right now in a variety of activities. The teaching aspects of it have become in recent years much less the focus than it was in the beginning of the Jesuits hundreds of years ago from Ignatius Loyola. At that time, missionary work was the focus. And that is one reason, a major reason, why we have colleges and universities and high schools and a wide area of the world at large, including our United States right here. The missionary work was not for education as a start, but as for the spreading of Christianity and the teachings of Christ. And but that came about from missionaries going to places with concentration of people and helping them develop and learn. And education, then, in the usual sense of the word education, came from that. And that started right off in the beginning. We see it here in the United States. We have 28, take just the colleges. We have a lot of high schools too, but take just the colleges. What are the colleges? The 28 colleges in the United States here. So many of them are named after the city, including University of Detroit, University of San Francisco, St. Louis University, etc. How did that happen? Because it was the Jesuit missionaries that got here first and grabbed the name. Yeah, we beat Wayne State out. I wonder if they would beat the University of Detroit if it happened that way on this. But that's what's behind it on this. So it was missionary work which got into educational activities. That is becoming less so right now. In the not just here, but in general. A lot of our Jesuits are our younger Jesuits, of course this means most all of them compared to me, but our younger Jesuits are very directly focused and interested in not education in the usual sense of classroom, laboratory, etc., but rather in working in the parish and social justice area and with individuals in various other areas too, other than education on this. And so I suspect that in the future there will be less and less focus among the Jesuits here in the United States on education, both higher education and high school education, college, university, and high school, and more on social activities of another kind, all connected with Christianity and the development of it and the relationship of Catholicism, Christianity, and other religions of the world. Yeah, I expect that's going to be happening. It's already showing. We don't have, for instance, anymore Jesuit presidents at our universities, including right here.
Okay, great. So again, you've already kind of started touching on this, but how do you see the Society of Jesus and the Church changing in the future?
Well, that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be changing as the world is changing to meet the needs of the world. For instance, we have a lot of our Jesuits right here in the United States now who are focused much more than it used to be on the immigrants to the United States. Yes, Hispanic, but not only Hispanic on this, but the problems that immigration and immigrants, including undocumented, and the problems that exist for their survival in some instances and proper and appropriate functionings in our country here, connected with religions, all this. Blending that together is a real challenge for anybody. And the Jesuits, in general, are already are well underway in helping that develop in a positive way, avoiding suppressions of various kinds of things that really ought not be suppressed. And that's not just religion itself, but it involves social justice, politics, and all those things that are interrelated, definitely, too. And it includes racism of various kinds, things all along that line. I see Jesuits, and it's no secret, I see Jesuits being attracted, and already are, being attracted to that, very definitely so. Another change that has brought about these tendencies is the fact that in my day, when I entered right out of high school. That was standard in those days. Nowadays, it's not standard at all. In fact, we don't take people right out of high school now this. And so we end up with people who are already college graduates and beyond, sometimes a good bit beyond, who've had experience in a variety of ways, very much in keeping with the Jesuit charism, but not education, which what used to be the focus back when I was younger.
Great. So that was my last question. But is there anything else you'd like to add to the history project?
Yes. I'll have one little finale here on this. I have students who have trouble imagining what it must be like. These are college students here. What it must be like to be 91 and having been teaching here for 57 years. How do you survive? We survive, as I see it, because you either find something you like or you help make it something you like. I found that combination all the way along. Yes, I officially retired this year, but it's basically due to the fact that for some strange reason at the age of 91, I haven't got quite the energy I used to have just a few years ago. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.